Hey everyone, welcome back. So now that I've got the inside of the deck and hull glassed, it's time to clean it up and get started on the outside of the hull. So we'll get it flipped over and start to prepare it. Before I roll out the glass, I'm going to fill in the seams between the panels. So I'm going to use a little bit of thickened epoxy, and I will put it into some epoxy syringes. So I've talked about this in a previous video about whether or not I bevel the panels on my boats, and I do not bevel them. I think I prefer to have a bit of a outer epoxy bumper protecting the seams. If I bevel them, then the seams will come together much sharper, and so I think it'll be a little bit more brittle if you run into stuff. I feel like the outer epoxy bumper is just a little bit more durable. But I'm not saying that I'll never do a beveled panel design, but this is just why I haven't done it so far. So it's not that hard to get these things filled in though. It's just another step. And after those epoxy bumpers have set, I give the whole thing a nice sanding, just to knock down the high points. And I go over it with a 220 grit and then 320 grit sandpaper just to give it a nice smooth surface ready for the fiberglass. But of course before that we really clean it. So I give it a good wipe down with denatured alcohol. And then after that I go and touch up the stain that I knocked off with the sander, because using stain is a constant back and forth between sanding and retouching. And then it's time to roll out the fiberglass. This is 4-ounce cloth. And after I get it trimmed up, I'll try to spread it out a little bit with a foam roller. You can also use a brush, but you don't want to use your hands. You can get oil and dirt and grease and whatnot on the fiberglass, and it's best not to do that. So anything you can use to smooth it out without actually touching it is a good idea. And then I come in with the, this is unthickened epoxy. This is just straight epoxy mix. And you can see I drizzle it on a little bit at a time. I don't just dump it on and start pushing it around. I do a decent job these days of not dripping. And that's just by putting just a little bit at a time and working it in and going back and adding where you need it. On this initial wet out, I'm not trying to put down too much. I just want enough to wet it out and make it transparent, but you can see the weave in the reflection of the light, and it's not until this gets tacky that I'm going to go back and fill the weave, and that's when it'll get nice and shiny. This might actually be my first build that I didn't drip any epoxy on the floor. See if you can spot one. Now, as we're working our way towards the end, there's a way that you want to cut the fiberglass so you can wrap it around, and it makes for a nice smooth transition. So you saw I trimmed off the fiberglass with about an inch to spare down the edge of the bow. And as I wet it out, what we'll do is fold that stuff over on itself. So first get the side nice and transparent, and then I'm going to peel the fiberglass back. And then I fold the other side over and get it nice and wet. And here's another spot where using the filler, the thickened epoxy on the outside of the panels helps. If they were beveled, this would be much sharper, and it's hard to wrap fiberglass around a sharp edge, so this edge being a little bit rounder helps with this step. So I wet it out, and then I put the glass back on, and then I'll fold it over to the other side. And that'll make a nice strong protective barrier. And in fact, that little tuft of fiberglass up on top will get trimmed off after it sets, and then the whole thing will get another strip of fiberglass over top of it. So it'll make for a nice strong leading edge. And then of course the same treatment for the stern. It's important to use your wife's favorite kitchen scissors for this step, and then put them back as if nothing happened. So we peel it back and we fold and fold. And that one's a little bit shorter. I could have left a little bit more length on that. But it'll work out. Alright, and then after I'm done wetting it out, I'll go back and throw on the rest of the epoxy that I have, and I use a foam roller over the entire surface of the boat to pick up any excess epoxy and distribute it elsewhere. And I just keep going over it a few times just to make sure everything's even, everything's wetted out, there's no areas that look like it could use more epoxy, and there's no drips or anything like that. So a nice even distribution everywhere with that foam roller. Okay, I'll give it a couple hours, it'll start to get tacky, and then I'll come back and start filling in the weave. Onward and upward. Here we go. Alright, I'm going to do the fill coat on the hull pretty soon, and I use a chip brush to do it. And these things are notorious for shedding hair, and you don't want that all over your boat. So you got to kind of prepare your chip brush, and I'll show you how I do it. And other people have done it on the internet. It's redundant, but this is how I do it. Okay, there's my thin crazy glue, and I still have a little bit of this left. This is the accelerator. So you just put it in right at the base on both sides. And I don't really have a use for thin crazy glue, so I don't mind wasting it. I'd rather waste crazy glue than have hair in my kayak. So I'm gonna put a bunch in there. And I'm just trying to glue them all in place. Alright. There you go. That'll get nice and hard. And then give it a haircut. Okay. And that's what we'll do. That should hold pretty good. Now it's ready for the fill coat. Alright, to wet out the weave, I like to use a lot of epoxy, but you want to put it on consistently, and you don't need it dripping everywhere. So the pattern I go in is to start off with a bit of a crisscross X pattern, and then I'll go up and down on the boat, and then left and right as though I'm tipping it. And you just work up and down the length of the boat, but start off by just the crisscrossing X's, and then up and down, and then side to side. And it's a little bit sped up here, you can't really see it, but you can take my word for it. But you can see it looks a lot more shiny this way compared to the other side. And that is ideal. It's not dripping, it's not running. It's just sitting nicely on the weave. Fills it in, looks like glass. And my entire garage floor is covered in drips, so I've been practicing this for quite a while. So good luck not getting any drips anywhere. Anyway, now that that's all done, I can trim it and then get into some sanding. First with the hand sanding, 180 grit, and then the machine, 200 and 320. Or 220 and 320. And then, yeah, that'll do it on this video. So thanks a lot for watching, and plenty more to come. So I'll see you on the next one. Later.